There are two situations that increase the impact of genetic drift on populations and will rapidly alter the allelic frequencies within those populations. The first is called the bottleneck effect. And so in a bottleneck effect, you have a big population. In this case, here's the original population. All the little circles and the different colors are denoting different alleles in the population. So I have some kind of disruptive selecting agent, like it's a disease, a rapid environmental change, habitat loss, I overhunted and eliminated most of the organisms there. A volcano came and lava flowed down and eliminated those things, whatever it might be. The end consequence is I started with a robust population and I shrunk the numbers up considerably. That's where the bottleneck occurs. So the way to kind of think about it is like I have a bottle, my bottle's full of colored marbles, and I tip it upside down and I shake it. So I'm not quite sure what's going to come out, right? Is it going to come out in a direct proportion to whatever they are in there? No, it's strictly chance of what comes out. It's like the lotto ball spinning around, right? So certain individuals are going to survive the event. However, are they going to be completely representative of the original allelic composition of that community? Or that, not community, but that population? No way. So in this case, that's shown by a reduction in the number of colors. I only have the red and blue genotypes that we're able to get through. That's it. The rest were lost. They're left behind. So now the selective pressure is reduced. The population starts to grow in size, but what's the problem? They have less what? They have less variation. So even though the numbers come back and the population might look real robust again numerically, in terms of genetic variation, they're quite limited. Is that a good thing? Because now you're prone again to what? Environmental change. So you're very susceptible to any change in the environment. You don't have a genetically robust an arsenal anymore against environmental change. All right, so that's the basic idea of it. And I've already given you examples of this in ecology, so let's come back and talk about these from now a genetic perspective rather than just kind of an ecological perspective. So the idea here is that survivors that are in the surviving gene pool, they no longer represent the original population's allelic composition. By certain chance events, certain alleles went through, others were completely eliminated. Now what's happened is I have shrunk the population size. What instantly becomes more important now is factors. Chance. And in this case, what's going to happen to the population? It's more prone to the effects of genetic drift. All right? When you shrink that population down, genetic drift is going to have a big impact. It can drive that population to fixation, right? Or elimination of certain alleles. So here's an example. I talked about the elephant seals, right? A robust populations of thousands and thousands of animals, hunted to the point of extinction. How many left? 20. Repopulated, now there's thousands of animals, but the problem is what? They're all the same genetically with very little variation. One disease can wipe them all out. Change in the water temperature, if they're not accustomed to it, something in their diet, we wipe them all out. We're already seeing radical changes occurring along our coast because of climatic shift, which is warming our waters tremendously. All right? So if you want to take a look at a scary picture, go look at the warm water conditions in terms of a map, and you'll just see this giant swath of red all across California where the water is abnormally warm. What's it doing? It's killing all kinds of things. And it's bringing stuff from the south towards the north. A lot of that stuff we don't want to see, like hammerhead sharks and tiger sharks and things like that coming up as well. So it's really altering what we see here. Last time we had a warm water event like this, we saw hammerhead sharks right off of Campus Point. Isn't that crazy? All right, so that's an elephant seal. Cheetah or another one. We talked about cheetah a little bit too, right? Did we talk about cheetah? I think we did. So cheetah, what was the bottleneck? Overhunting, restriction into game preserves. So what we've done is we've eliminated their larger population and the alleles that were housed in that larger population. We've isolated them down to individual groupings which have to inbreed, further reducing the variation. And again, what's the problem? Monomorphic for many genes, all kinds of nasty genetic load problems that have come from that, where homozygous recessive traits are expressed, hip dysplasia, low sperm counts, all kinds of immune problems in terms of the ability to compound diseases and fight them, on and on and on. So these are the direct impacts of a bottleneck in reducing the genetic variation in a population. The founder's effect is another type in the sense that it can reduce the genetic variation in the population. Well, how is it different? In this particular case, you start with a large, robust population with many different kinds of alleles and lots of genes. And then what we see is basically a certain subset of that population migrates away. Is the portion of organisms that migrate away ever going to be exactly the same in terms of the ratio of the alleles that they contain in regards to the original population? Never. So again, in this case, it's not some nasty disruptive event that shrinks the population. You're just getting a subset that migrate away. So you see this all the time. One place you see this a lot is in bison. So bison in Yellowstone, during periods or a couple of good years where they've had water and it's rained a lot and the vegetation comes up and they do very well and the calving was quite successful, what happens is they exceed the resources. The amount of animals exceeds the resources that the park can support. So what do the animals do? They leave. And so a subset of the herd will literally start to migrate away. And instinctually, they migrate away on old migratory lanes that take them all over the country. Unfortunately, ranchers don't like that very much. So if you have bison that wander off Yellowstone, what do? They shoot them, okay? So you have these migratory bison that are basically making their way, and then they shoot them. And the rationale is they carry diseases and blah, blah, blah. It's actually the opposite way. The cattle introduce the diseases to the bison don't introduce the diseases to the cattle. But it's kind of a sad situation. But naturally, they would migrate away and set up founder populations in other places, and then they would spread their numbers. Okay, so the isolated gene pool, again, no longer represents the original population. When you shrunk that number down, it's now much more prone to the effects of what? Genetic drift kicks in, and will start to swing alleles in one direction or the other, fixation or elimination. All right. Now, in the absence of gene flow, natural selection is going to kick in real quick on that individual population in the small size, because wherever you go, is the environment going to be exactly the same as where you came from? It's always different. And so natural selection will pick the best fit variants for the new environment. It's going to alter the allelic frequencies in different ways, and then genetic drift will also be driving it with greater effect, one side, one way or the other. Isolated islands are a really nice example of how this can work. So that brings us to genetic divergence then. What is genetic divergence? It's any structural, functional, behavioral. Again, morphology, physiology, and then ethology, right? There are behavioral differences that favor reproductive isolation as a product of genetic change. So when we think about genetic changes between populations, they are counteracted by what? Gene flow or genetic drift? They're counteracted. So remember, genetic changes between different populations can be countered, meaning they become more similar by what? Gene flow, okay, by gene flow. That will homogenize the differences, the genetic differences between subpopulations. However, if one migrates away, or there was a bottleneck, and also I place a barrier between the original population and the new population, will that increase or decrease genetic differences? We'll have a tendency to speed up the genetic differences between the two populations, all right? So barriers that prevent the exchange of the genes, what are they doing? They're stopping gene flow between the populations. They're going to lead to evolutionary divergence of each population. So I have a parent species, I have a daughter species that begins to branch off. Let's say it migrated away as a small subpopulation. Also, there's a barrier that forms. The barrier prevents the exchange of information between the daughter species and the parent species. When I say information, I mean alleles. And then what happens is you get quickly genetic divergence. So here's a nice example. I have a western meadowlark and an eastern meadowlark. Do they look the same to you? Yeah, they look identical. Morphologically, you can't tell the difference. The only way I can tell the difference is to listen to them, because they do what? They sing different. So they have different song. So here's the situation. Eastern meadowlark migrated across, hit the Rocky Mountains. Certain individuals were able to get over the Rockies, which are a massive physical barrier. But the gene flow is tiny. It is tiny. Once you get to the other side, there's conditions that are very much like the conditions on the other side of the Rockies, the west and the east. So morphologically, was there any need for change? None. So when they got there, morphologically, they stayed the same. Most of their behavior stayed the same, but there's one difference. They're no longer having exchange of material with the old population. So what modified over time? The song did. The behavior of the song changed. Okay? Genetic drift drove it in a certain direction, eliminating the old dialect. What's interesting now is if you put them together, they're more than capable physically of mating with each other, but they will not. Why? Because they no longer speak the same language. Isn't that interesting? So that's an example of a daughter species branching off from a parental species, a barrier stopping gene flow, leading to enhanced genetic drift, which therefore leads to genetic divergence. An increase in the differences between the gene pools of the separate populations. Once you separate a population and you piece it apart, the first thing that's going to happen is natural selection operates on the new environment in different ways than it's operating in the old environment because the environments are different. Each is presenting a series of problems that will be solved. Selection will pick what? The best of who's ever there. Not necessarily the perfect one, but who's just better than. That's what it will pick. It actually might be that old variants in the original population are much more fit for the new area, but they're not there. They didn't make it. So it's just whoever's there is better than. So mutation then kicks in. You get brand new alleles that arise in the populations completely different from each other. And you're not sharing those mutations between the two populations. And then finally, genetic drift will kick in different ways. In the large original population, it's just kind of meandering around, returning to the norm. But in the smaller population, it's driving it quickly in different directions because of sampling size, right? All right, sampling error, I should say. So that's the basic idea. So mutation, natural selection, genetic drift are going to enhance that genetic divergence between the two populations. All right. We'll give you guys a break today. It's a good place to stop. We've been going hard.